Thank you for joining us today. Please do join in. It's your event. Ask questions, make the most of the networking, put your cameras on, get around the tables. It's all good fun. I'd like to thank our partners today, Bruntwood Works, Mallcomm, Mills and Reeve and Node for organising this session with us. In terms of format, there will be two halves with networking in between and at the end. As you'll have started to see, the networking room is where you can join tables and video chat with other guests. You can move between tables just by double clicking on the table you want to go to and meet other people. There's also a private messaging function at the bottom when you click chat. If you want to swap email addresses and that sort of thing. You can also search for guests by name in the chat box and see all the participants listed there, as you can in the right-hand section on this page as well. You can also, in the networking room, you can click on the sponsors' logos to find out more about them. And lastly, there will be a video recording of this event shared with you afterwards. So on with today's content. What is the future of retail and leisure property? There's a big spotlight on both at the moment for obvious reasons. They're both going through a very challenging time in both sectors. To debate this, we have gathered a cross-section of experts from the worlds of real estate, technology and business to talk about where we are now and indulge in some future gazing to unpick the trends that are reshaping these challenging sectors for the future. So let's get started. First up, we have a presentation from someone who's passionate about pushing the boundaries of real estate, having worked for disruptive startups and property advisors alike, and is now head of retail and futuring at Legal & General, Denz Ibrahim. Denz, if you pop your camera on, we'll get your presentation underway. There we are, welcome.
Hi, Paul.
If you want to share your screen, and we'll just check that that comes up and then I'll step out. That's great, first time. Over to you. Good, see you later.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Paul, and thank you for inviting me to talk today. As you mentioned, I'm the head of retail and futuring at Legal & General Investment Manager Real Assets. Just to give you a bit of background before I go into the deck, we are a landlord. We own and manage approximately £4 billion worth of retail assets across the UK, spanning across shopping centres, retail parks, and numerous kind of individual shops across high streets across the UK. I joined in 2019 as the head of retail and futuring to completely rethink how we do retail, really, and really begin to have a much more consumer-centric focus in what we do. And that goes across kind of the culture of our business within retail, but also how we begin to manage and operate our assets. Our ultimate mission, as you can see on the first slide, is making incredible places for people. Everything we do is about that, and everything that we are doing moving forward is all about putting the customer first. But before I go into that, we have to really think about where we started, right, and what's happening in the sector right now, and things are changing very quickly. 15 years ago, this was the best-selling mobile phone. This is how we listened to music. None of these companies existed, and only 6% of UK homes had Wi-Fi in 2004. So when you think about those rapid changes, and we've always had changes in society, but I think the speed at which things have changed, especially within our sector, have been incredible to see and witness. And I think the narrative that we've had over the past few years of it being a market shift is frankly just not right, because a market shift means that it will come back. And I actually don't think that's true. I think it's a cultural shift. It's a cultural shift in how people engage with brands and how consumers engage with place. And that cultural shift is important for us to begin to think about how we respond to that. We have to speak a different language, right? As landlords, as developers, as curators, as agents, as whatever kind of touch point you have within the retail sector, we have to speak a different language. No longer can we just talk about this stuff, you know, the property stuff. This is very, very important at some point in the journey. Of course it is, and I'm not saying it isn't, but we have to start from these points of view. We have to start with people, place, experience, service, and rhythms. And what I mean by that, I mean, the first four are pretty obvious, right? But rhythms is something which is really interesting and what excites me the most. And I feel there's a real disparity between, I guess, a static real estate business and market and sector versus a very ephemeral, ever-evolving consumer and operation brand environment. And we have to make sure that we join those two environments together, curating and creating the right content at the right time in the right places. And retail is changing very quickly, right? The way consumers are engaging is changing, and so is retail. And we're witnessing that every day with new things coming out. And just to be really clear, this is not going to be me talking about online, and I think online is the savior. I think there's an important part to be playing in the online piece, but there's some really important stats to be looking at here to begin to understand what this cultural shift looks like. In 2018, 155 million square foot of retail space closed in the USA, you know, and on the flip side, you had a 15% year-on-year growth in e-commerce in the same year. That's probably changed a lot more since COVID times, but I think that's a really interesting kind of disparity in how people are spending their money. There isn't a confidence problem. There's a disparity, and there's a change in where people are spending their money. And if you begin to zoom into that a little bit deeper, you know, you think about, okay, what does online look like on the left-hand side? And a great example is Alibaba, which is Amazon's competitor in the Far East. Alibaba every year have a day called the Singles Day, which is basically our Black Friday. And in the first hour of their Singles Day in 2019, they sold $12.1 billion worth of stuff in the first hour. And if you begin to think about that, what that looks like in the offline world, that's equivalent to the annual revenue of 290 H&M stores. You know, there's an incredible kind of difference in what's going on here, and the rate of things are incredibly changing. And when you look at press releases that Amazon bring out saying they want their customers' psychology to change from I want that to I bought this within 15 seconds, the whole notion of convenience and function is completely out the water, right? It's completely changed. And then you begin to think about the things that Amazon are launching, and it again blurs the boundaries between online and offline. And this actually really surprised me when I heard about Amazon Go, and it's not new news now, but actually pre-Amazon Go, my thought process was functional shopping, buying your deodorant, your boxers, your underwear was going to happen online. That stuff that you don't really care about. Potentially it's subscription, you know, you get it every other 3 months or whatever it is. It's online, it's not requiring an experience. And then offline will be this kind of much more experience-led, memory-built a process that you go through when you visit your shopping center, your local shops, whatever it may be. But actually Amazon Go is this really interesting kind of balance of that, because you've got this physical retail store which is utterly functional. You know, you walk in, there's no trolleys, there's no queues, there's no tills, there's no people there. You walk in, you pick up your stuff, you put it in a bag, you leave through this turnstile, it scans your items all at once, it scans your phone, and you get a receipt from payment of your phone within 5 minutes of walking out the shop. And there's an incredible amount of kind of flow that goes through this experience that I feel is extremely functional and convenient, but they've managed to do that within a bricks and mortar store. And then when you go one layer deeper, you look at what Amazon are doing with their Ring doorbell, which they bought a couple of years ago, completely removing the friction between home and screen. You know, there's a really interesting, and if you don't know what this is, it's a digital doorbell. When a delivery, you install it to your door. When your delivery driver comes to your house to deliver your items, they ring the bell. It rings your phone if you're at work, and your FaceTime. The delivery driver comes up onto the phone, waves at you. You can open the door through the mobile. He can put the package down and leave. And that's an incredibly seamless way of doing it. And actually, when you begin to think about that, why would I want to go and buy stuff in a shop, whether it's a deodorant or a black t-shirt, whatever it may be, when that can be as easy as it can be, you know? And then there's another thing where they're delivering to your trunk, and they're trialing that at the moment which I think is incredible to begin to blur those boundaries between home and screen. And then you've got this other level of online, which is constantly talking about, okay, it's functional, but actually, how do you begin to make it social? How do you begin to create this kind of these social interactions within the online sphere? And actually, Instagram stories are a great example of how they begin to tailor through your digital social realm, a product component which you can drive. So once you've got all of this happening, where does the world of physical retail sit? And I think that's a really interesting question. That's a question that we're in, and what I do day to day. And I really don't think it's all doom and gloom, really. I think there's a real interesting opportunity to begin to reimagine and rethink how consumers and people engage with place. And bear with me here when I talk about this and think about this notion here. We live in an algorithm world, right? We live in a world where Netflix tells us what to watch, Spotify tells us what to listen to, Amazon tells us what to buy, HelloFresh tells us what we should be eating, Tinder tells us who we should be dating, and Facebook tells us who we should be friends with. And essentially, that just isn't human. That isn't a place where people want to kind of be told what to do, but organically experience stuff. And I think retail is all about these words, right? It's all about creating an incredible experience, having a personalized, bespoke product and a delivery in front of you and service in front of you. It's all about discovery. It's about curation. It's about tapping into the local community and tapping into independent and local brands, which sit next to global brands. And if we begin to do that, the whole role of the landlord has to shift. Right? The role of the landlord, and I talk about this notion of moving from librarian to editor. The librarian, historically, the landlord was a librarian. He was the guy that would collect the rent, fill the shops, and make sure the shopping center was clean. But he has to do that stuff now. You know, and actually we're moving to a librarian to editor notion, where the editor has to make sure the content is in the right place at the right time, moving back to all of these touch points. That's really, really important. And then once they do this, the whole notion of consumer facing spaces completely changes. It's no longer a siloed function of I'm going to go and buy a product and I'm going to leave the center. That the asset has to do lots of different things. And that's such as speak like a magazine, change like a gallery, sell like a shop, entertain like a theatre, engage like a campaign, create loyalty like a club, and function like a public space. It doesn't have to do all of those things, but if it does a few of those things, it can become relevant very, very quickly. And once you begin to think about that, the success metric of these assets completely changes. Historically, success was positioned at price per square foot or sales per square foot. But how about slightly provocatively, and maybe thinking about this slightly out of the box in a way, you know, how about it's smiles per person? How do we begin to measure, you know, the metrics of smiles per person? How many times someone smiles when they walk through your shopping center or your shop? And Alibaba trial in this at the moment in the Far East, when you have to smile at the camera to pay for your items to prove that you're happy. What about if it's collaboration per customer? Imagine how many times you could measure how many times customers collaborate when they walk through your shopping center or your retail park or your store. You know, if there's a metric to measure that and how much value you drive out of that. Or what about education per eyeball? You know, every time a customer learns something through their experience in the stores, how do you begin to drive measurement through that and value for the brand, value for the landlord, and value for the customer equally? You know, and I think the most important thing out of here in putting this all together is it goes way beyond the till. It's no longer just about the till, you know, and we have to think about the other types of experiences that have to be intertwined within this. And the most important thing, I think, is how do we bring in new thinkers within this new realm? You know, we have to begin to use different people who think differently to curate these environments and move away from the same people in the same suits that have been delivering the stuff for us over the last years, and be completely anti-cookie cutter. The issue of kind of creating relevance and incredibly relevant environments for people for the right context has to be at the forefront of our minds. This anti-cookie cutter notion is, how do you begin to create a local narrative, a much more curated narrative within these assets? And I talk about the 5 key ingredients of the retail of tomorrow, because I really believe that these 5 things will really change shopping centers, town centers, leisure parks, retail parks dramatically. And I'll go through the 5 key ingredients now. You know, number 1, it's about creating a programmed, ephemeral space that is constantly changing, that is relevant to the context that it sits in. It's about really reimagining and rethinking the public realm. I really believe the anchor of tomorrow is the public realm. How do you drive incredible places for people that people just love going to because they don't have to buy anything, but they love meeting their friends, they love eating there, dating there, working there, doing all these different things, and that's the gel of these assets. The third thing is product. You know, it's not just about the actual product that the shop sells, but it's the product of the shopping center. What are the shops? What is the retail mix? How do we want to change the rhythm of that asset through the products and the content that we deliver? The fourth piece is community. How do you begin to engage the community within the locale that your asset sits in? And I think this is really important, right? Because I don't just mean young millennial creatives. I mean a plethora of different people. How do you begin to bring the olds in, the families in, and at what points do they engage with the assets? And what are you doing to deliver and make them want to be there longer, engage more, and spend more essentially at the end of it? And the last piece is workspace to an extent, but it's about rhythm. How do you move away from just the 1 hour ephemeral customer who comes in and shops at your center, and move away from that about being something different? You know, I want someone to come to our centers to work there, to come to a yoga session, to have a cookery class, to drop their kids off to nursery. And yes, they're going to buy something and grab a coffee after, but they have to see this environment as a complete 360. Now, the reason I say this is because I just want to step back a little bit and rewind and think about what is happening in the macro kind of environment that we live in right now. Essentially, my belief is that live, work, and play environments are blurring. And I think COVID has been an incredible catalyst to this, because what we're noticing more and more is that live-work balance has been an incredible kind of shift in the way society works. And just bear with me slightly. So let's start with our work lives. Thankfully, I hope none of us work in offices that look like this anymore. We don't really work 9 to 5 anymore. It's kind of an ongoing, constantly digitally connected way of working. We can do deals anywhere. We can call anytime, anywhere. We can write emails anytime, anywhere. So no longer is there this desk, lunchbox kind of society in a booth in our work lives. And we're much more driven around well-being and that kind of work-life balance, as I mentioned before. And therefore, we're much more nomadic in how we work and where we work. If you think about our live lives, you know, I read a stat somewhere the other week that there's never been more under 35s living at home with their parents right now, right? So there's a massive shift in the way we are living within the UK at the moment. Home ownership has halved for 18 to 34-year-olds since 2006. And the most kind of alarming stat for me is that within the next 10 years, we estimate single person occupiers will make up 41% of UK households. So just imagine this, right? If I'm in my parents' living room, I can't really entertain my girlfriend or my friends in their kitchen. If I work from home, I don't really fancy working in my studio flat, which is tiny. You know, what do I want to do? So therefore, the third place, the place between the home and the work, I believe is the retail spaces of tomorrow. A place where people can come and work, can come and play, can come and meet people, can come and relax and enjoy a coffee, can go for a yoga session, can watch a film, can do all of these different things, because that is the true third place. And therefore, our mission in this is about reimagining in a couple of things. It's about reimagining the public realm. It's about redesigning the customer interface and understanding what does that customer interface mean to that context and that customer. It's about rethinking the moments and memories. If we are moving away from tills and shopping, and that just plays a small percentage of the part of the conversation, we have to think about what's going to keep people coming back. And the moments that we create and the memories that we want people to share is going to be ever more important and more unique to the environments that we sit in. And the last thing I want to mention here is about reinventing the business model. I don't think any longer we can rely on just having a shop and renting that shop out. We have to rethink the revenue model and the business model that we create. And that is by bringing in lots of different types of uses, of course, so diversifying the asset use and the uses within our assets, but also diversifying the revenue model. And that's about bringing in different types of revenue streams that look at value in different ways beyond just square footage of space. And that could be driving value through audiences, media, whatever it could be. And I think that's the really interesting future that we need to look at. And I'm sure we're really looking forward to talking about it, about understanding how do we diversify that experience and that model for the landlord and the investor moving forward. And my last statement here is about how do we begin to think about these spaces in a different way. And I quote Jan Gehl. He says, "First life, then space, then buildings. The other way never works." And it's a pretty old quote, but I think it's extremely relevant within our assets at the moment. And if you think about that approach and how we think we should be approaching spaces and retail, let's think about first life. It's about first the customer, then it's about the people, and then it's about the spaces and the content that we deliver, then it's about the commercials. If we work that way around and we start with the customer first, we can definitely deliver relevant and exciting environments to deliver curated and fantastic spaces for people. I've definitely gone through that much shorter than I thought I would. So that definitely allows us for some more conversation time, Paul.
Absolutely. No, that was superb. Thank you, Denz. That's really, really thought-provoking and gives us lot to talk about. Thank you for putting that together. If I could ask our other panelists to put their cameras on, we can get the first panel underway. Okay, we'll just do a quick once round of introductions. We know who Denz is. When I come to you, just say who you are, where you're from, what you do, and then we'll get started. Danny.
Hi, Paul. Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me along today. My name's Danny Crump. I'm Director of Urbanism for Broadway Malyan. Broadway Malyan are an architecture and urbanism practice, 16 studios worldwide. I'm based in the Manchester studio. I'm a landscape architect and urban designer and master planner, and I'm very much a public realm designer, as Denz was talking about, and like to think of myself as a placemaker above and beyond all of those. Do a lot of work for the public sector, and I'm currently working on a lot of town centre, city centre projects around the Northwest, but also the UK and the globe. My particular interests are in sustainable communities, transit communities, town centres, healthy streets, and follow a data and evidence-based design process. So very much using technology to help us inform that process. But at the end of the day, it's about creating authentic places and places for people. Outputs of those, definitely economic, but perhaps I'm more interested in the social value outputs. So, you know, what our schemes can bring in terms of benefits for local communities. I suppose finally, just to sum up, I've recently been appointed onto MHCLG's High Street Task Force expert panel. So I'm looking forward to working for the government and supporting communities and local authorities in transforming the high streets over the coming years.
Wonderful. Congratulations on that appointment. It's very exciting.
Thank you.
And Ed.
Cheers, Paul. I'm Ed Cook, Global Growth Director at Mallcomm. Mallcomm is a property management software solution. So we work with about 60 clients across the globe, major real estate investment trusts, institutional funds, property management companies. And I am also a director of a brewery ice cream producer, and we've also got a couple of bars in our portfolio. So in that sense, I am coming to this conversation as a retail operator, as well as on the PropTech side of what I do.
And are you joining us live from the brewery?
I'm live from the bar, Paul. That's exactly where I am. I promise you that this is water and not a gin tonic. But yeah, I am live from the tap room in Cornwall.
Very good, thank you. We're all envious immediately. And Lara.
Hi, I'm Lara Marrero. I am the global firm in the world. We have 5,000 people and 50 offices, of which at any given time we have about 700 people working on consumer-facing retail spaces, anything from malls to retail stores and brand experiences in general. I am not, although I work at the largest design firm in the world, I'm actually not a designer or an architect. I actually studied psychology, advertising, cultural anthropology, and marketing. So everything Denz was saying resonates to me from the people side, because it's always about understanding behaviors and catalysts to really understand how to derive the purpose of place and to drive relevance. So really excited for this conversation, and I'll throw it back to you, Paul.
Very much. Just one question on the presentation. Denz, obviously you work for Legal and General, and you're talking about some radical sort of futuristic ideas there. When you're working for an institution that's all about sort of one would might perceive as being risk averse and conservative, is it easy to get buy-in for new ideas from your fellow colleagues?
In short, yes. I think we're extremely excited about the opportunities in retail, in leisure. We do a lot of stuff which is very consumer facing across our residential with our BTR, and we've got a big leisure portfolio. So yes, there's an incredible amount of appetite in the business to deliver incredible places for people. So we're really excited about it.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. And Lara, you mentioned you're not a designer, you're a great observer of human behavior in your work. How would you define the era that we're in now?
So it's funny you say that. A little while back, we did a study on this. I think it was probably 2018 where we put something out where we talked about the 3 changes in consumer behavior and basically consumer disruption. And the first was 1950s to the early noughts, which was the age of efficiency, when the retail business was in the mode of more stores, more stuff, when people were driving their consumption patterns through the roof. And it was also the birth of my favorite thing on the planet, a credit card. So that was lovely. It let all of us overspend and amass a huge amount of stuff, most of which we didn't use. Then we moved into the second wave of disruption, which was from the early noughts to about 2018, 2019, which was the age of experience, which those of you who know me know that that's my least favorite word on the planet, even though I have to use it regularly to explain concepts. But it's really about people trying to embrace that FOMO and that Instagrammable moment. It was the double barrel digital experience, the digital economy, where we were looking at how e-commerce and physical space could coexist. At first they were at war, then they started coming back together, competing for funds. And now people really see it as for what it is, which is one red thread running through a brand's experience through different types of engagements. But really what that also did was it led to a whole bunch of brands getting a little bit lazy, a little bit inauthentic. They were just trying so hard to get impressions for social media that they lost their way a bit. And this is where we started entering the age of belonging. And 2018 to about now is the massive accelerant for it. But it's really looking at the role of brands in general, whether or not you're a workplace or a retail developer or a retailer, connecting in a meaningful way with the community and really driving purpose through everything that you do. It's about co-creation and purpose and agency. And you're starting to see, I mean, everything that's bubbling up in my inbox these days is just that. It's please help us create spaces that are meaningful again and not have it be the commerce portion of this really driving what physical space is all about.
Yeah. And Ed, given these sort of structural shifts, the cultural shifts that we're seeing come through retail and leisure, how is that affecting demand for the sorts of tools that you provide as a tech platform? How are you seeing change in demand over the last sort of 6 months or so?
Well, yeah, let me try and link those two things together, and what Lara was just saying. And before I joined Mallcomm, I ran an organisation called Riva, and before that I worked in retail advocacy as a lobbyist. And retail real estate advocacy as a lobbyist. And I remember many years ago, an organisation called New Economics Forum published a report called Clonetown Britain. I can't remember when it was, 2006, something like that. And I spent quite a lot of time saying nonsense, absolute rubbish, and this is just successful retail. People like these shops. You know, the reason that every single high street looks the same is that's just successful retail. And quite evidently, they had a point. And what we created was places that, to Denz's point, were a little bit cookie cutter. It was a little bit easy. There wasn't a lot of competition because there wasn't, you know, the rate of online shopping that there now is. These businesses were successful, but we got a little bit lazy. So the idea of kind of creating spaces and places that were unique to this town or the city where whoever it was that was responsible was shaping it. Kind of it left there, everyone kind of forgot about it. Now, linking that to the tech platform, what we provide is a solution that allows a lot of the mundane activity of property management to be taken out of people's day-to-day functions, right? So administrative tasks, communications with occupiers and other stakeholders, workflow management, audits and inspections, data collection, all of this stuff, which actually, to be quite frank, nobody wants to do because it is very boring. So if you can take that job away from somebody, then you free them up to be much more creative, to think about a place and a business, a shopping centre, an office space, the wider urban environment, with a much more razor-sharp focus on purpose, to Lara's point, and differentiating different places, rather than just having to do those day-to-day tasks. So what I think our platform enables companies to do is to be more creative, to be more strategic, to develop really strong relationships with other businesses in locations, and to create more interesting, more bespoke towns and cities.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what it's all about. It's these things take figuring out, and giving people the time, the space to do that is giving them resource, isn't it, at the moment, which is perhaps scarce as teams are under pressure. Danny, tell us a little bit about your work on town centres in the context of Denz's presentation, and talking about maybe public realm as anchors and things like that. How's that playing out in actual projects that you're working on with public and private sector at the moment?
Yeah, sure. Interesting Ed's comment on clone towns, and you know, I think it's quite a pertinent one, really. I heard an interesting statistic the other day that in the 1970s, 70% of goods that people bought were provided by 29,000 different retailers. By 2000, 70% of goods that people bought were provided by 100 retailers. And actually, the top 3 or 4 of those, the Asda's and the Tesco's, you know, they're actually providing a huge proportion of that. And I think the issue of clone towns is you know, it's a massively fundamental problem. And while people have moved away from a transactional experience into you know, something much more emotive, they're looking for something different and distinctive and unique. And I think what we do in our work in town centres and city centres is try to understand what that is. So it's to understand the DNA of a place, what makes a place different, what makes it special, and then really to use that actually as the anchor, as the building block, as your starting point, so that you're not offering the same experience, you are offering something that's different from your neighbour. And the best way to understand that is to talk to the people that live, work and play in those places. And so, you know, we really promote a co-design process, and by that I mean talking and consulting and engaging with stakeholders, and not just obvious stakeholders of officers, so council officers and developers and landowners, but communities. So really trying to understand real needs and respond to those needs. And I think local authorities, in my work in towns and cities, they get that. You know, they are at the very heart serving communities. So that's it may be something that they don't do so well nowadays, but they understand the value in it, and they're very, very much behind and supportive of promoting that type of approach.
Yeah, absolutely. We've already had a couple of questions in. There's one that's been sort of upvoted a little bit. So we'll come to this. Come to the Q&A now. Denz, a great presentation. This is Danny's colleague Sean Cleary at Broadway Malyan in the audience. Curation of mix of uses and retailers is critical for making successful town centres. My question: who should take on the role of curator, and how can tech help this? Denz, do you want to take that first, and then Lara second?
Sure. So, I mean, I guess the thing that we're learning very quickly is there's an incredible amount of talent in the local towns that we have assets in. So what we're doing is we're getting our network out there to begin to think about who those local talent curators are, to begin to bring them into the assets and help us curate those environments. You know, the one thing we don't want to do is bring a big London agency to come in and tell us what we should be curating within our shopping centres. What we need to be doing is tapping into the local talent who are completely networked. I mean, we give you a quick example. We're launching a brand new street in the middle of one of our towns, 15 shops, all independents. We hired a local creative director, utterly networked, and they'll be there to support the shopping centre management team, to report into my team, where I'll be hiring in and bringing in kind of strategic creators who can begin to drive the creative thought within that. There's a lot of C's in those sentences. So yeah, the short answer is that we're tapping into the local talent within our assets, within the towns that our assets sit in, to drive that relevance.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Laura.
I'd say almost the exact same. I think the only add I'd have is perspective on this one, because I think as we look at how we got to this point, it's important to look at how to avoid where the town centers and the high streets are losing their relevance. And, you know, if you go on the journey of, you know, let's say you've just gotten married, you're about to go purchase your first home. When you're looking for a place, you're looking for for a location that has vibrancy, that you have access to things in a convenient sort of way. You buy that home and you have your first child, you continue to grow that family. And over the course of 20 years, your needs as a resident of that community change. However, a leasing model where you're signing on a 20-year lease for a property for a potential tenant, you know, that is now losing its relevance. So as you start to lose footfall on that high street, those stores go out of business because they're not getting the footfall and nothing gets curated back in. The community is losing its relevance because ultimately their property values are going down because that street is no longer relevant in support. It is no longer seen as a vibrant community, and it all kind of folds into each other. So I think in a large part, to Denz's point, it's about getting someone local, but it's also about having the community take account. And it's about getting the community to work together to drive relevance into places that matter for them.
And just to add on to that, right, because I think what will end up happening is a question that will come, and I get it all the time, is how do we make money from that and how do we drive value, right? And I think the biggest thing you've got to realize here is all the people that do drive value to these assets want this as well. You know, this is not just about the customers, this is about the brands, the occupiers, whoever those occupiers are. They might not be all retail, they might be a whole lot of different things, but they want a story to attach to. So if we invest into this and we give our occupiers and our customers, as in our people that pay us rent, a story to be able to join to, and we also give our customers a reason for coming there for different reasons across the day, then we're onto something, because that's how you drive value, both social value and also a commercial value. I just wanted to add 100%. On to that. Just wanted to add on to that component.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point. I've written down risk as well. You know, where does the risk reside on something like this when you are seeing retail asset values being marked down, and it's a lot for sale at the moment, and some people will be seeing that as an opportunity as well. And maybe that's something we'll explore in due course around the sort of flexible financial models as well. But just on this curation point, Ed, do you think tech has a part to play in that, of playing curator?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, and I would agree with both Laura and Denz that I think the answer to the question is that there's no one answer. So there's no one group responsible, one individual responsible for setting an agenda for developing, evolving, repositioning places. It has to certainly has to involve the community more. As I was saying earlier on, I think we all probably got a little bit complacent, a little bit lazy, cookie cutter approach to places. Increasingly, responsible developers, investors are working with the business improvement district, with local community groups, charities, theatre groups, the cultural sector representatives. Now, that's a lot of people, right? So one of the great things about our platform and platforms like it is the ability to get messages out to that very varied group of stakeholders and collect that information back into a platform where then analysis can be done, thoughts gathered, conclusions created and actions taken. So yeah, I mean, tech is a very efficient way, and tech like Mallcomm is a very efficient way of collecting that information, analysing that information, and setting a strategy in response to what it is that people want for their local places, their local high street.
Yeah.
I think the risk question is an interesting one, which I'm looking forward to exploring a bit more, because some of Denz's ideas are great, and I know that they are deliberately provocative. And if you remember a few years back, David Cameron talking about happiness indices, and everybody kind of laughing him out of town, right? So why do we care that we're at the bottom of the happiness index in the UK? Why does it matter that Sweden is at the top of it? Well, actually, the last 6 months have proven that those things matter much more than we thought they did. And at the moment, they absolutely should be central to how people are making decisions about how their places are transformed. It isn't just about the commercials. I mean, from an operator's perspective, I'd probably slightly pick Denz up on it's not all about the till, because I can assure you, as a retailer, it is all about the till in the end. We can't run a sustainable business without any income. But how that income is derived, I think, is a really interesting topic for investigation. And it isn't. I 100% agree that the old models of doing things, the risk is not doing anything. The old models of doing things are no longer fit for purpose.
This is where our debate's coming in, Ed. You called it, and this is it. This is our little area.
Yeah. I mean, kind of ruthlessly commercial. I know we've got to pay salaries, we've got to pay suppliers. It's got to,
sure.
Again, it's got to turn up on the till at some point.
But I think retailers are looking for more, because if they're getting conversion online and they're being able to get the sales online, the real factor for Place, I mean, if you think about what a retailer's mission is and why they have a front at all, it's to attract and defend their customer, right? I mean, fundamentally, it's making money, but you also need to create that relationship with the customer. And time again, DTC, direct to consumer brands, are becoming bigger and bigger right now. And people are reclaiming their brand for a reason, which is they need to take accountability for their voice. And the only way they can do that, and they've seen it time again, we've seen 87 online brands go offline in a year that we've worked with. And it's because they've realized that no matter how productive they are online, no matter how much money they make, they can't keep the customer loyal unless they really start to, create a place where they can create that and engender that belonging and build that relationship. So we are still very much a species that enjoys coming together in community. And so as much as online can do that, online and digital isn't going to save us. People will at the end.
I don't dispute that at all, although I do enjoy these kinds of conversations, because I think people that are committed to places in the built environment, they often talk about human beings and we are social animals, so we want social interaction, right? Well, I actually dispute that. I think we want great social interaction. We want great environments. Actually, more often than not, we're let down because the environment's a bit crap, to be honest. So yeah, would I rather be in a not very pleasant environment with lots of people, or shopping online? Probably shopping online. Would I rather be in a great environment, a vibrant environment, a relevant environment with lots of people? Yeah, of course, the shop online. So it is definitely the environment, as Denz was saying, and Danny as well, is absolutely a competitive advantage. But
I think it comes
that way.
When you're looking at that factor, which you're totally right about, it comes down to understanding the value of time. And ultimately, when it comes to people, even though retailers and brands and all of the commerce of it, we're all looking for money, the way that a person behaves is how you're respecting their time. It's time fast or time slow. Are you making my fast time, my task mode, as convenient as possible? And guess what? Retailers have completely forgotten retail centers. I mean, walk into a retail center and see if the signage actually matches up where things are. I mean, these are the things that frustrate the hell out of consumers. And when you look at it, that's the time fast. It's get me what I need as fast as I can possibly have it. And then you win them over because you've made their time matter more. Retail slow, Ed, here's your point. If you can engage them in a meaningful way through aspiration and entertainment and providing something that makes them want to be there, once you've already proven that you've made their efficient time fast, that's where you convert loyalty. That's where you really make the difference. All of the places you go to and how you get frustrated, it always comes down to this, or majority of the time at least, comes down to this factor of this is overwhelming. It's not worth figuring out. I'm out.
Yeah. Denz, did you want to come back on the sort of risk or any of the values topic?
I was just, I mean, it's moved away now, but I was going to touch on the tech comment that Ed made. I get really dubious when the word tech comes up in retail, because we've got a big problem here with about rehumanizing our environments. You know, we've got to begin to create a new type of environment that our customers feel that they can engage with. And the one concern I have with tech, and we've got to be clear, tech is a facilitator, right? Tech ain't going to be this thing that creates some sort of experience. It's not. Or if it is, I've just been told I've got 5% left on my battery, so I'm going to put my charge on in a minute. But it's this thing that we have to think about as not a layer on top of the retail asset, you know, not a layer that blocks the customer with the brand or with the experience. And that's what I think is really, really important. And I was going to come into that point. Tech is important, but tech is secondary, in my opinion. It has to be rehumanize the environments. Let's begin to build a nice and incredible engagement between customer and asset. And then the tech can become the bridge that hopefully is the mouth of the asset beyond the actual experience.
But I think rather than secondary, I think it's probably complementary. And we would definitely agree that it doesn't replace human interaction. My point at the beginning was actually it enhances the ability of people working in places to engage on a human level more, because it takes away the boring, mundane stuff that actually isn't really value creative. So it isn't a replacement for those relationships. I think certainly our platform enhances those relationships.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, and Danny, there's a couple of other questions that are sort of asking the same thing about what the response is, whether it's a town, whether it's Nick Gerard in Blackpool, you know, whether it's at the developer or the asset manager level. How do we respond to these accelerating rapid changes in society to make places that are relevant and sustainable for the next 10 years?
It's a tricky challenge. Oh, sorry, it's me. It's a tricky challenge, and you know, COVID has really accelerated the path that we were on, I think, in our town centres, and you know, it's added its own set of concerns really around risk and around health and well-being, and so I think you know, we talked about co-design. We talked about talking to communities. I think that's a really essential starting point. We've talked about place-led cities and towns and ensuring that they're people focused, and I think that's also really important. There's a lot of layers that you need to unpick, I think, with a town centre or an urban setting. Some of that's to do with connectivity. So how do people come in and out of your town? Does it facilitate walking and cycling? Is it completely dominated by cars, which creates severance and noise and air pollution? Are your places static, or do they have the ability to flex and change and be agile as circumstances and the world changes? Can they respond to, you know, some of the big issues that we're currently facing in terms of climate and zero carbon and those issues as well? We think about creating clusters of places, so some granularity in a place rather than, you know, we're working in some towns at the moment that have huge lumps of shopping centres that almost have just landed from space. They sit within their own environment. They don't interact with the context in any way, shape or form. So, you know, how do you deal with those? How do you retrospectively reconnect them back in to your town and to your communities? How do you re-establish some of those connections across places? How do you look at urban form and grain and build that back in and retrofit that back into places to start to attract people? I don't think there's a magic bullet, a solution. Every place is different. Every place has a range of issues and will need, I liked Denz's slide where he talked about bringing different types of people into projects. So, you know, we work with circular economy specialists, we work with biophilic specialists, we work with anthropologists in the same way as, you know, as Laura, it's about people and understanding what people want. So it's about building the right sort of team. It's about understanding what problems are in individual places, because every place will have a different set of problems and ultimately will have a different solution. And definitely agree with Denz, there's no cookie cutter solution for anything.
Yeah, and Lara, do you see repurposing coming through in the conversations you're having with mall owners at the moment? That we hear a lot about, retail to logistics, retail to residential, having apartments over shopping centres. Do you think that's really going to play out?
I think a large part of what we've been doing, I think we started doing it, it's probably in 2010, we started taking on a huge amount of repositioning work for retail centers, most notably the Westfield Century City project, where we actually tore down an office building, which always feels really good to be able to add more retail to places. I think more and more, as we start looking at the notion of the viability of a property in the community it serves, it is about creating and driving relevance into these spaces that are already well placed and have the ability to, basically, when you're looking at them, they're inwardly focused, and it's about really turning them inside out to connect back into the community. And so we've been doing quite a lot of work on that. And I think, again, what COVID has done is put a massive accelerant. We started seeing this happening over the past 6 years in the UK, and I think now it's just really started accelerating to the question. We've been looking at residential, we've been looking at office, we've been looking at entertainment, we've been looking at new kinds of anchors that are more community and more placemaking driven, like Denz was talking about. And I think people are trying to say, nobody's looking at it as if it's a kit of parts that you just have to plug something into. I think the responsible way to look at it is saying, what does this community have? What is it lacking? And how do we start to mesh these pieces together to drive vibrancy and to make this asset more relevant? We're even looking at health and wellness, and looking at, putting hospitals or assisted living or senior living in these areas. And at the end of the day, when you start to look at the puzzle pieces, it's really coming down again to the function of behaviors. I think, Denz, you said it brilliantly in your presentation, where we're getting away from this work, live, play. And I've been talking about it, saying, you're right, because we're doing everything everywhere enabled by this thing, right? So it's really moving more towards work styles and lifestyles. And every place we're designing is just a gradient of how much of each we're doing there, and facilitating and allowing people to do those things. So if I want to go to the gym, and then I want to go to work, and then I want to go buy something, I have the ability to do that. But let's be real, I'm not going to the gym. But that's the whole idea, is have that ability to choose. And that's what's going to make relevance happen in these places again.
Mm-hmm. And how important, put this to any of the panel, maybe Denz might want to come in first, in terms of demographics and data about knowing who is, who's behind the footfall. You might be able to see the basic sort of ticker, but if there's so many changing behavioural patterns, knowing whether somebody's over 50 or, those people related, and having to pitch in this sort of very tumultuous time, are there the analytics, the data sources available to help you make informed decisions?
So in property, we're very, very good at understanding what I call hard data. We have no idea about behavior. So we are working very hard to begin to understand the behaviors of our customers, the rhythms of our customers, where they come from, how often they come, what's their journey look like. And everything that we do, we're launching a number of projects across all of our assets across the country in the next 12 months. But everything we've done in the past kind of 7 months is have a load of anthropologists, have a load of people watchers, ethnographers come in and just watch what people are doing. What are the behaviors? Who are the customers? Where are they coming from? And everything we do in terms of a physical asset project is informed by the insights that we've been driving through the customer piece. So data plays a part in terms of pre-project, should we say? It's about informing that project to be relevant and curated in the right way to engage the right type of customer and the right type of behavior. And then we've got a whole load of data stuff that we're doing which measures that. Now, another problem within our sector, unfortunately, is if we do something, what's the ROI on it? I'm moving away from just space. How do we begin to drive ROI? And everything that we're doing through the data component is about understanding what are the key KPIs that we've got and what's the return on investment for our investor, but also our customers. So there's lots of different metrics, but essentially you've got three people that are going to be delivered to. You've got your landlords, that's going to be a metric. You've got your occupier, and then you've got your customer. And we've got a set of KPIs and value drivers for each of those users, shall we say, of each project, because that's the only way we can drive value.
Yeah, Danny, you want to come in?
Yes, I mean, we use data a lot as well, but in a slightly different way. So we're trying to understand the place, and you know, so we will often look at sources of data from ONS, Land Registry, DEFRA. Local authorities hold a lot of data themselves, and combined authorities. So we'll look at boundaries of influence and where the statutory boundaries are, where the conservation areas are. We'll look at demographics. We'll look at prosperity. We'll look at ownership. We'll look at kind of the physical fabric of a place, the topography and the movement, and map where the heritage is and what the land uses are. And that's all about building a picture of a place that is based on facts and not just based on someone's opinion. And often you will talk to local authorities who portray themselves as having an excellent understanding of how things work in their town, and often they've got great insight, but they don't understand the full picture. And I think what the data does is that it allows you to perhaps spot patterns and trends that you might not do normally. And then during the process, I mean, the benefit of the data, certainly to the projects that we work on, are that it provides this transparent evidence base that can be used to substantiate your decision making, but also part of applications for funding. So all of our data is aligned to HMT, Majesty's Treasury Green Book business case process, and the 5 cases, and we use the insight that we have into that process to actually think about our proposals and to make them more attractive to those approving funding processes as well. So it's very attractive to a local authority. It's also useful to get sign-off at committees and members, committees from members, because it's quite hard to argue with the data. You know, it's telling you a story. You can argue with the analysis of it, but you know, the data's the data.
Absolutely. And Laura, you want to come in?
Yeah, I think as somebody who spends her entire life looking at people and data, the one thing I'll say is data shows you safe zone, and data like demographics can really kind of show you status quo and where things are today. But ethnography and really understanding individualized behavior is going to show you patterns on how it's going to grow and evolve in the future. And oftentimes it's the demographics that get us into the relevance mess, but it's understanding how behavior, it's not just about the people that live there, but it's how people, I mean, this is the first time in our lives, guys, that an entire generation is born of 3 generations as parents. We're dealing with like complete societal breakers for anything that we at one point would be able to use as markers for why things would happen a certain way. So you have to really watch and learn what people are doing. And then a lot of times, which we've learned in retail, we're using personas more than anything, which are not, they're age agnostic. They are background agnostic. They're truly looking at motivators and looking at mindsets and motivators. And fundamentally, when you start using that, we've been using them in retail environments for 15 years, you get a lot closer on your returns because you're not looking on it against predictive analytics on models that are based on community information, but rather you're looking at patterns against how people are spending, what people are doing, how they're using their time. And then once you start to understand those values, you're able to model experiences that generate engagement in a different kind of way. It's very different. We're using machine learning and AI in totally new ways. And this is a science that basically what we've been doing over the past 4 or 5 years is going to accelerate over the next 6 months. And it's going to be at that peak of acceleration. But that's why the ethnography is so important, to watch the behavior.
And who do you work with for those AI tools and the other data tools at Gensler for the tech partners?
Yeah, so a lot of our retailers have done a ton of investment already in these areas, and a lot of even our developer clients, they're giving us a lot of the access. There are a ton of programs like that Microsoft hosts that we use quite a bit of, and then other third parties that are, test and learns, where they're giving us access to be able to trial things because they're at the edge of their game. And so we're constantly linking things together, and we're also developing our own tools that are letting us understand the way people are moving through space, like through things like Graph, which is a product that Gensler has originated. So
fascinating stuff. Anybody else want to sort of finish on the flexibility question around models? Denz, I know L&G have brought in a sort of turnover rent, which is quite a move for a large institution. And you're seeing at the coalface what retailers and asset owners are doing to try and hang on to occupiers and things like that. Share some of your observations about the flexible models that we're seeing and maybe how they'll pan out in the next 12 months, just as we draw to a close.
Sure. So, I mean, we launched a flexible partnerships model about 2 months ago. It was a thing that we were going to do at the beginning of the year. Obviously, what happened, and we kind of felt that it was a great time to do it kind of midsummer for 2 reasons. One, because we wanted to move away from kind of landlord-occupier kind of narrative and move towards a much more partnership driver to begin to build better relationships with our occupiers. And the reason we did it was for 2 reasons, right? We wanted, on the one hand, for us to have flexibility in who we worked with across our assets. And that was making sure that we had the right type of occupiers that fitted our vision over the next 3, 5, 10 years. And that really believed in our vision and what we're doing with our places. But also the second component was the most important thing for me, was about incorporating optionality for our occupiers. I keep saying occupiers, I mean partners. So incorporating optionality. And what I mean by that is giving the occupiers and the partners a different way of working with us, giving them options, moving away from the kind of in the act 74 lease, that probably pretty much a barrier for success for these guys, and giving them different ways to work with us. So we introduced a framework for the team to build on, basically. And we introduced 4 packages. Package 1, what we're calling Flexi, much more shorter term leases, anywhere between 3 to 6 months plus to 36 months, turnover deal, offering access for much more independent local brands to get involved in our assets and want to join them. Then you had a package 2, which was what we called operational. That was much more for your middleweight national brands who wanted to move away from the kind of long-term fixed lease profile, as it were, deal, and move to a much more flexible turnover model, maybe slightly longer than a flexi, which is probably 3 to 5 years, but working together with them to deliver great results and making sure that we as the landlord have control in terms of delivering what we promise. So having control of the environment, having control of the customer base, making sure we drive the right audiences at the right times. Package 3 was what we call flagship. That was very similar to a traditional model, because you've got to realize that some occupiers do like that, but they had to deliver footfall, they had to deliver sturdy income, and frankly, they probably wouldn't have done the turnover deal with us anyway. So those kind of occupiers have to be there. And then the last one, which I thought was pretty clever, was us doing a thing called Flexi Flagship. So it's the amalgamation of 2 packages, and it offered the flexibility of the turnover deal, so offered a much more turnover based deal, but the flagship in terms of duration being 10 years plus. And that was designed towards kind of the F&B operators who maybe have a bigger capex to put up front or require a bit more time to engage their customer base within that context. So I guess the ultimate reason we did this was get closer to our occupiers and have a partnership approach. And offer optionality, be open and allow access for brands that historically never had access to our assets because they either were too expensive or they weren't right for them. Now we've got the opportunity to open those conversations to a number of different types of brands and occupiers, not just in retail, but in different realms as well.
Yeah.
So from our side, Paul, just quickly, I mean, unquestionably, one of the most popular the most popular, but the functionality of our platform at the moment is sales collection. So clearly that's an indication of a move towards more turnover-based arrangements. As an operator, the most recent deal that we just did was a 10-year lease with a mutual break option at 5 years outside the Act, turnover only, increasing by a couple of percentage points after a certain turnover was reached. So that de-risks things for us, but it provides the owner of the building an opportunity to get what would be a comparable rent if we were, to Denz's point, successful in working together to market the site and to make sure that we're getting that trade through the door. So, I mean, it does very much depend on an open relationship. So we've seen in the last couple of months, it's been pretty disappointing from my perspective as an advocate for the sector for 15 odd years, that we, at a time where retailers and property companies needed to be working together more than ever, we've seen pretty poor behavior from some of the traders in the way that they are manipulating a situation. So, it does require a partnership, and to some extent, you've got to leave your swords at the door. And we would do more deals like that, but there's no fixed rent. We would do more deals on that arrangement where we have the ability to de-risk through turnover arrangements.
And just to be clear, right, we're not reinventing the wheel here. I mean, airports have been doing this for years. Outlets have been doing this for years. It's just making sure that we have an equal balance and making sure everyone wins when they win and everyone has a risk there. But that risk is only down to someone else, right? If you're a landlord, and that's this notion about moving from librarian to editor, if you have much more control, curatorial, creatively, but also operationally within your assets, and you drive the right audiences, you drive the right stuff around the individual spaces, the content, then you're kind of onto something. Going back to Lara's point, you start with the people, right? And then you leave the occupiers to do what they do best, but you give them the opportunity, the tools to be able to flourish as much as possible. So I think it's that partnership piece that is really, really important.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's the old adage, isn't it? From a management perspective, you look after your staff, then the customers look after themselves. You look after your customers, shareholders look after themselves. So start from the bottom and work up, rather than focus too much on the shareholders at the top and work your way down.
Yeah, absolutely. Just seeing those principles sort of repositioned for the modern age. Really enjoyed that. Thanks, guys. Brilliant session. Thanks everyone for giving up their time. From Cornwall, from Madrid, from Southeast London, and from Manchester, from Stockport. Thanks everyone. Virtual round of applause at home, those that are watching. Thanks to our speakers. That was brilliant. Can I ask attendees to stay on now for we've got a networking break, so we'll flip over into that and we'll come back for the second half at 11:30. So we'll now switch into networking mode. Thank you, and I'll see you in the other room.
Thank you very much for everyone for being here and listen. A bit of our thoughts as Pi Labs, which is a VC fund in PropTech, and our thoughts on retail, leisure. So I'll give you a bit of background on Pi Labs, trying not to do too long of a shameless plug into our fund, and at the same time run you through the problems that we were seeing with retail, some of the solutions that we've been coming across, and our hopes for the future. So getting right into what Pi Labs is, I'll be very, very fast about this. We, as I said, are PropTech funds based out of London, UK. We invest all over Europe, and obviously PropTech is our core technology. And the reason why we decided to invest in PropTech was very much backed by data. So if you can see here that back in 2013, fintech funding was very much at the same level that PropTech funding was in 2017. So we could start seeing a trend of PropTech actually becoming the next big thing in terms of venture capital investment. This has become one of the new trends for sure. Or at least we think so. And we as Pi Labs decided to take a bit of a different approach to what PropTech means. So we try to take a very broad view. We look at the traditional areas such as commercial real estate, legal technology for the real estate industry, real estate investment management. But at the same time, we like to be very broad and look at smart cities, sustainability, and basically try to understand ourselves if something is or isn't prop tech, and we end up being surprised at a few times. Just to show you briefly what are the themes that we've looked at, I've already mentioned a few. This has been our fund number 3. So we're now ramping up investments, and we're hoping that all of you can help us in this journey as well. And I'd like to move quickly. This is just a brief background of all the investments that we've made in the various segments of the value chain of prop tech. But I'd like to move very, very fast into the next topic, which is what we're all here for. So this is what we like to call the future of retail. This is one of the main themes that we look at. So this has been a topic of interest for us. It's always been an area that we've looked actively into. I have to admit that we had yet to be involved. But at the end of 2019, we started looking quite actively into the retail sector. I would call it some sort of a premonition to what would come to pass. And the reason that we decided to do this was not just because we thought it was going to be an interesting subject, but it was, again, backed by a lot of data. So I'm sure that a lot of you know, but online shopping has been growing. So it was 17% back in 2019. It's expected to become a third of all shopping by 2023. So we start asking ourselves the questions. So how, for example, will we be able to connect online and offline sales? So if you go into a shop and you decide to try on a piece of clothing, and then you end up going home and buying that piece of clothing, how can you tie those together? At the same time, we know that the workforce is being reduced, much like a lot of areas in the real estate industry. And we have seen that retailers that actually use AI experience almost a third of the growth extra compared to all the retailers that are still yet to adopt that path. At the same time, a lot of stores are closing in UK. This is an area of concern because this number was quite steady, but has been increasing over the past few years. And obviously this year we expect to have almost a record number of stores closing down. So our question is, are there new business models that can come into play here that actually bring people back into the stores? And finally, something that we cannot overlook, Amazon has had obviously a huge impact of that. We weren't actually aware of this, but for every £100 spent anywhere in the UK, 4 of those pounds go into Amazon. This is surprising, doesn't sound like a lot, but it's every pound spent in the UK. So here we're starting to think, how can independent retailers actually compete with Amazon if they have all this power? So what are going to be the next platforms or the platforms of the future? At the same time, this is a problem that affects both sides of the equation. So it's not only landlords that are struggling or just retailers that are struggling. Both of them have their own issues. So landlords have had to deal with logistics and maintenance in their physical stores. The vast majority of them don't have data, or the retailers don't want to give them that data. There's been an historical reason for that. And possibly you as a retailer don't want to disclose that information, because if your store is doing really, really well, you probably don't want your landlord to know that, because they might want to increase your rent. So there was a misalignment of incentives here. At the same time, this is something I already touched upon. Very hard to track that connection between online and offline shopping. Then if you move on to the retailer side, obviously having a physical store is a massive operating cost that they have to endure. Digitally enabled brands don't have these costs, and nowadays it's so easy to set up an e-commerce shop. I mean, platforms like Shopify made it so easy, Amazon as well. And then finally, and I think possibly one of the trends that we're seeing the most, and I think that as a millennial, I'm fine to say this, nowadays customers don't want to go to shopping centers or to the high street just to buy something. They're looking for experiences. And we know that some of the brands are actually closing a lot of their shops because they want to have showrooms just to so that people can see the products and then either buy in store and have it delivered at home, or go home and then buy that product themselves. So customers are now more looking for these experiences, and I think we're getting into the experience generation. And on top of everything, this happened, and I'm sure that this sign frightens all of you as much as it frightened us. But I'm an optimistic person by nature. I like to think that there's always a silver lining to everything. So it's been 6-7 months since the pandemic went full scale, and we've already seen some positive signs. So there's a significant portion of real estate traditional companies that decided to experiment with technology just because of the pandemic. And this is impressive. Almost half of them decided to trial new technology just because a pandemic happened. In terms of more traditional shopping, I think some of you might be relieved to know that after the pandemic's over, the vast majority of shoppers will maintain their visits. There's a significant part of them that will actually increase the time they spend shopping, because 7 months at home do have an impact on us. So you want to get that time back. And finally, from our own perspective of the sector, almost all the PropTech investors think that COVID-19 actually will help the real estate industry in technology adoption. So this means that the changes that we were expecting to see over the next 10 years will actually happen most likely over the next 12-24 months, if not earlier. And to think that all of this came through a pandemic, as I said, there's always a silver lining. I wanted to also touch a bit upon what we think the main drivers for this innovation will be. So what we're thinking that the future will look like. And we've identified through research that we've done, you can check this online, it's called Rebuilding Retail. And there's two main points or two main areas that we think that the innovation from retail will come over the next few months. One of them, flexible leasing innovation. And this is a concept that has been around for ages. It's been used widely in, for example, airports, but it never really made its way into the mass market. And the second bit of it is consumer data sharing, which comes back to the problem that I mentioned initially. There wasn't actually any incentive between retailers, landlords, and even real estate agents to share all this data that they have, and instead in trying to become greater than the sum of the parts. So in terms of flexible leasing innovation, there are two main areas that we think are going to be quite relevant over the next few months. So one of them is new business models. And I'd like to explain these a bit with concrete examples of companies that we are seeing, because I think it's better to understand. And one of them is Souk. So Souk is a flexible retail platform that is trying to bring the concept of the flexible office space into the retail world. What this means is that instead of you as a retailer or a digitally enabled brand having to have a lease for 5 years, 10 years, or in best case scenario, 12 months, you can actually book slots by the hour. They provide you with a customized branding. It's a very interesting solution, so do check them out. But it does flip the model a bit on its head, and it assumes that the landlords will have an active participation in this because they will also be sharing the revenue. So this is a very interesting model that we've seen and something to be on the lookout for. The next one is, again, bridging this gap online and offline. We mentioned Connect in our report. So they have this total customer engagement platform, and they are trying to understand how can online sales be traced back to your physical presence. Then flipping onto the consumer data sharing, one of them that we've seen a lot is consumer behavior, but we know that there's a lot of regulations around GDPR and privacy compliance. So PlaceTech is a company that is trying to do this the right way. So making sure that they have the most granular data on customers from the moment they wake up until the moment they go to sleep. but making sure that their privacy is always protected. And finally, the last model that I want to mention is CACI. They are not only trying to tie revenue into how you calculate your rent at the end of the month through flexible retail, but they're trying to use other KPIs, such as what is the turnover in store, what was the click and collect returns, what's the marketing value of that actual store, and what was the online sales uplift driven by some campaign that was done in store. So these are the startups that we've seen, but at the same time, we like to give credit where credit is due. And I think there's some honorable mentions in the real estate industry as well. So for example, Legal & General has just committed that they will start offering flexible leases from 2021 onwards. So this means that they will go back from their traditional model of 5 to 10 year leases into not only having shorter leases, but tying those into turnover. So this is, again, something that has been around for a while, but it's interesting to see someone in the industry actually taking an active stance on this. The other example that I wanted to mention is Colliers. They're shifting all their leases into a data-based platform. So taking all of the points that we've mentioned about collecting these KPIs, they will start actually calculating the leases using this database. So this is, I think, an exciting time. And for us as well, as you can see, we've done a ton of research on the various topics around retail. We're just launching one on the future of real estate investment management, but the next one is going to be the future of retail, which we're hoping to launch by the beginning of the next quarter. So we'd love for anyone that's interested in this topic to come and talk to us. I mean, you have myself, you have Andy, the head of research. We're always available, easy to reach out to, and we'd love to learn more about the industry, both from the startup perspective, understand what are their current struggles in this sector, but at the same time talk to the retail and real estate people that are seeing the struggles on the other end and try to understand how we can bridge this gap. So feel free to talk to us and please let me know if there's any questions afterwards. You can always send me a LinkedIn message. That's pretty much it.
Thanks, Hugo. Superb presentation. Thank you very much for putting that together for us. Plenty of food for thought for some of the things coming through. And yeah, do check out the research on the PyLabs website as well, and on PlaceTech.net. We cover everything that PyLabs does. I'll ask our next panelist to join us now. If they pop on their cameras, we'll get the next discussion underway. Thank you all. So we've heard from Hugo. I'll go around the room now and just ask you to say who you are, where you're from, and then we'll get underway. Let's start with you, Caroline.
Hi, morning everyone. Caroline Hamrati. I am a real estate lawyer. I'm a partner at Milton Reeve, a national law firm based in Manchester most of the time, and I advise all of landlords, tenants, and developers.
Thank you. And Becky?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Becky. I'm head of partnerships at Appear Here. We are the world's leading marketplace for retail space. The easiest way to think of us though is a bit like Airbnb, but for retail space. I've been with the business for about 6 years now, and then prior to that, worked much more on the brand side. I set up lots of different concept stores for startups.
Okay, thank you for joining us. And James.
Hi everybody, James Tootle. I work for Bruntwood Works. We are a Manchester-based property company, mainly commercial, but have recently kind of bought into retail assets, which I'm sure we'll come on to today. We've got sites across the Northwest, but then also in Liverpool, Leeds and Birmingham. Yeah, I've been at the company for 6 years. I'm kind of, my title's head of retail and leisure, and I'm kind of mainly working in our two shopping centres in Stamford Quarter in Altrincham and Stretford Mall in Stretford.
Okay, and James, if I could start with you, I mean, hearing what we have about all the trends and the wave of change that's coming through retail and leisure, how does a developer like Bruntwood respond to all that change?
So I think, to be honest, a lot of what was said in the previous presentation rang true with us. So, thinking about our two particular sites in Stretford and Stamford, we kind of bought those centres along with our JV partner, Trafford Council, last October, which was an interesting time to buy them, given what had then happened in kind of March this year. But I think our approach has really been to engage with the community to understand what it is that they want from their centres. Thinking about Stretford Mall as the example, when you walk in there, there's a number of empty shops, and it's quite clear that there needs to be an exercise in kind of repurposing that centre and that town centre. And I think our approach and our to that is very much of, what does the community want from their town centre? At the end of the day, it's not our town centre, it's theirs. So, we've been going through a period of consultation, which was delayed by 6 months, given everything that's been happening with COVID, and we've had to come up with a bit of a tech solution in order to undertake our most recent consultation, which is due to end at the end of this month, which has been successful. So yeah, I think it's about kind of developing and repurposing spaces with the community at the heart.
And we've heard a lot today about flexibility. Caroline, in the work that you're doing with retailers and with landlords, are you seeing different models, flexible sort of lease terms come into play?
Yes. Not wholeheartedly embraced across the board, I would say. I think that we are going through a period of great change in the landlord and tenant relationship. I think that there are growing tensions in that relationship at the moment, and it's not a particularly healthy one. That's not true for all landlords, obviously. This is a gross generalisation, but especially because I've got Bruntwood on there, and Bruntwood are our landlords. So,
we have a good relationship, I'm sure.
We have a very good relationship, but there is. I mean, there was already. On the retail side of things, before this year, there was already pressure on that relationship from the increase in online retail, tenants looking for more flexibility. And I think what's happened this year has accelerated some changes in behaviours, but it's put more pressure on a lot of struggling businesses and probably accelerated the departure of several. We've lost a lot of high street names that we didn't expect to lose. When and I'm holding on to when. It's when, not if, things get back to normal. It won't look the same when we get back out there. So so we've had that pressure on tenants and losing tenants, and in the meantime, huge government intervention. Unprecedented intervention from the government, and helping, and this moratorium that's been in place now on, landlords can't kick out their tenants if they're not paying the rent, and that can't last forever. And we've seen, so during that period, we have seen, I think, as Ed mentioned earlier, we've seen certain tenants abusing that and taking advantage of that and not paying the rent when they perhaps could. And so some landlords are starting to lose a bit of patience with tenants. So I think there is when you've got a situation where you've got the British Property Federation getting pretty cross with things that are going on, and the Estates Gazette saying landlords need to start saying no, then we're going to have to figure out how we get back, bring those two parties back together.
Yeah, Becky, what are you seeing from the landlords that you work with? Are they sort of more open to ideas now when it comes to flexibility?
I mean, yeah, without a doubt. I think, you know, that in all of the time that we've been kind of banging the drum for flexible retail, the issue has always been convincing landlords. You know, we've got 250,000 brands that are looking for space, and increasingly so that's what they're looking for. They don't want to tie themselves into a long-term lease necessarily without testing it first. Neither should a landlord. They want to figure out where they're best placed, in which location they can build the biggest community. And some of them are looking at it much more as a marketing play. So they don't even want to look at anything long-term. They want flexibility. And we were getting there with we work exclusively with most of the big guys anyway. So we were convincing them, but they'd give us a section of their portfolio and it wouldn't be the key stuff. And it's almost as if the pandemic has taken something that would, like, behavior shift wise in terms of landlord perception could have taken 5 more years, has happened almost overnight. And now what we've got is the demand's fallen, because we've got brands that are now wanting to wait it out and see what's happening there. But in terms of landlords, they're almost throwing things at us and are desperate for help. And, you know, it's kind of obvious to see why, and we're happy that shifted. The hope is that the two level out, obviously, when we get back to this new normal.
It's fascinating to hear. And you're seeing inquiries from the demand side. Are there still people with sort of shop ideas, or is that sort of frozen in fear at the moment? Or
so yeah, it completely fell off a cliff as London went into. We're London, Paris, and New York, and a few other cities as well. But they're where we've got our key offices. They all went into lockdown, obviously, for a period of a few months, and demand flatlined completely. So we went from doing hundreds and thousands of things a month to doing absolutely nothing at all, which was bizarre. Then started to pick up quite quickly over summer. Like France is back to like 80% or so of what it was pre-COVID, which is amazing to see. London a bit lower than that, New York quite a lot lower than that. Obviously, as every new restriction comes into place, so now again, as London's gone into 2, Paris has gone back into restrictions, you see it drop off again. But I think what's been inspiring, I guess, actually for us to see is the kind of businesses that are coming through in this time. There's people launching their business for the very first time and doing it incredibly successfully. We've got some brands, fashion retailers, that are actually, they're taking their business to where their customers are. People aren't traveling quite as much. They're not coming into the centres, but they are shopping in the local neighbourhoods. There's one fashion brand called Centrefront, and they've taken their store and they've done maybe 6 different neighbourhood locations, and they do it for a few weeks and they just take it to a new batch of customers and meet them. And then we've had some amazing stories. One, Notting Hill Fish Shop, is a company where they found that their sales were just skyrocketing through the main lockdown period, and they've actually taken on another long-term lease there because they were doing so well. So there's definitely uses. It's just who's adapting, how much risk they're willing to take, how much they're willing to play with what they're expected to be able to do.
Yeah, James, you want to come back in there?
Yeah, I think just we've experienced, to be honest, quite obviously the March and April were very quiet, but then coming out of that, I think mainly due to the business rates not being in play until kind of April next year at the earliest, people are kind of willing to take a chance. And, you know, we've had people that have, you know, been on furlough or have unfortunately been made redundant, and then have come forward with business ideas that they've kind of worked up during that period and are willing to kind of and want to give it a go. We've also seen businesses that are already established in other locations that want to trial a new location. So we've had the plant shop as the example that have come into the Stamford Quarter in Altrincham, having never, she actually originally traded there on the market way back when, but then has been kind of in various different locations. But she always wanted to come back to Altrincham, and this gave her the opportunity to really trial a store there. We've then been able to agree with her a kind of a flexible kind of lease agreement. So it's great for us because it gets a shop let and gets the lights on. But it's also great for her because it gives her the opportunity to trial her business in a new location. And if that goes great, then we can have a conversation about, a bit more of a fixed presence there.
Yeah, I mean, that leads on to one of the questions that's already come up from the audience about this issue of flexibility. Is it a short-term fix, or can it be part of a longer-term sustainable solution? Does anybody have thoughts on that?
I mean, obviously that's their entire business model. I think that the interesting thing with it is that it is typically seen as this kind of nice social fix as opposed to something super commercial. We were actually driving higher rents across the board if we can get high occupancy from leasing something flexibly pre-COVID. So if you think people are willing to spend more money for a shorter term, they kind of expect that if you can get your occupancy above 80-90%, you can be getting much higher yields than you would be from just getting a one unit. I think what we're also seeing now, which is interesting, is, and something that we're trying to kind of encourage more landlords to look at, is you don't want to lock into a long-term lease in a depressed market. So what you could do is look at something a bit more flexible, test those brands out based on the ones that do well, then take them into a long-term lease once the market's recovered a bit. Otherwise, you're going to be completely screwed for quite a long period of time.
Yeah.
I think it can be a long-term solution. I think it's just making sure that the kind of infrastructure is right, and you set up to kind of to cater for those retailers that want to come in. So, for us, that means kind of white boxing units, making it very easy. In some cases, we've even put kind of furniture and things, and shop furniture and display cabinets and things, so they can, literally rock up with their stock and trade for a week or 6 weeks or whatever. But you need to do a lot of the thinking beforehand in order to facilitate that.
Yeah. And Hugo, there's a question there on a similar vein around tech for helping smaller retailers and leisure businesses access long-term space. Is there anything that you've seen come across your desk that would fit that bill?
Yeah, we have seen a few business models that are trying to tackle that. So whereas you have now the flexible leasing solutions that almost allow you to book by the hour, by the day, we've seen on the other end of the spectrum, we've seen business models where they're trying to match small and medium businesses with landlords. So there's one business that we've seen called We Built the City, and what they're set out to do is quite simply almost a dating app between landlords and small and medium businesses. And then the landlords can pick whatever businesses that they weren't aware of might actually pay a premium and try to get a solution that's beneficial for everyone. So I think for me, it's a win-win situation, because a larger brand can hope to drive price down a bit in certain locations. Whereas some of these small and medium enterprises, they would actually pay a premium. They might actually have an incredible brand that will be unlike anything that's in that one particular neighborhood or shopping center. So, and the landlord has all to gain from it. So yes, we are seeing some business models, but definitely I think that, as Becky was saying, this is a time for experimentation, and we're seeing landlords trial a lot of things, obviously in the retail sector, but I think across the board.
Yeah, the people you mentioned there, We Built This City, are in the audience today. I've seen a couple of them there. So.
I know.
No coincidence. Caroline, a question from Nick Gerard at Blackpool Council, saying you hit the nail on the head about that landlord-tenant friction. How are we going to bridge that gap and overcome that friction now and in the future around flexible leasing models in a way that's stable for landlords? Any solutions that you're working with?
Well, yeah, I think there's a lot of work to do there to fix that relationship, which is in danger of disintegrating. I mean, it sounds like some of the businesses we've been talking about are perhaps on the, I don't know, the smaller premises, but some of the institutional landlords are, and the shopping centre landlords are not happy. I mean, we've touched on turnover rent-based leases, and obviously it's an interesting package that offering that Legal and General are coming out with. But that doesn't quite capture the whole thing, because you've got the showroom type shop where like the Apple store, where people just want to stay and then not actually buy anything till they get home. So as Hugo's mentioned, there are a couple of people looking at some modelling which will capture not just turnover, but the footfall and the dwell time, and the increase in online sales that flow from the present. So I think we will have to. I think some landlords will have to come to terms with the fact that retail is becoming a different type, its own sector. It doesn't just fit with the classic landlord and tenant relationship. It's going to be the changes that have come in. I think landlords are having to come to terms with the fact that they will have to get used to a different model. But I think there's a lot of work to be done there to join those two different. I mean, obviously Becky's doing it in what she's doing, but in terms of the institutions and the funds and our pensions and our savings sitting in a lot of these landlords, there's a lot of work to be done there. They're a long way apart at the moment, I think.
Yeah, and Becky, do you want to add anything? I mean, obviously your whole platform is around that flexible, but you'll see the wider landscape as well through the discussions that you have. Is there hope of closing that divide, do you think, between landlord and tenant on a broader level than just sort of the very core sort of pop-up ready spaces, do you think?
I think so. Interestingly, actually, we're hosting an event with our landlord community next week, and we were speaking to some of the speakers, because I'm hosting it, speaking to some of the guys there yesterday, and they're actually quite positive about. They think one of the good things that has come out of this is that they've had to speak on a human level to their tenants and figure out a flexible way of working together. So I completely agree, Caroline. There's lots of issues in certain sectors. Certainly, a lot of people we've spoken to, though, think that's one of the positive changes. So it's a slightly different picture. I think ultimately there's a shift that retailers have kind of got that I think a lot of landlords potentially haven't quite got their heads around, which is a bit of what the other panel were talking about in terms of retail now not just being about a place to transact, and the store not just being that transaction point. It's actually much more than that. It's either a showcase or a media point, or it's a community meeting place or a gathering place. And sometimes you do have to put certain things in to drive the content and make it super interesting to actually attract the big guys now and the audiences with the higher rent. So instead of everything being on that flat level, sometimes if we're looking at kind of from a placemaking angle, it's almost as if the independents are now the anchor as opposed to the bigger guys. So when we took on Old Street Station, we curated the station for about 5 years, and we did have bigger brands, but we'd only take them if they were doing something new or something interesting that they weren't doing anywhere else. And what we found there is that the independents were the ones that created the environment and the content and the audience. And that was effectively the thing that the bigger brands wanted to buy into. So it kind of flipped that model of get one amazing, big, established anchor in, and then everyone else will follow on its head.
Mm-hmm. And James, would you agree with that when it comes to the centres that you're working with? Would you see the independents as potentially being the attraction, or is it still about your sort of Boots and Next and M&S being the big draws?
I think, to be honest, I think it depends on the exact location, and I don't think we said it before. There's no kind of cookie cutter approach in terms of you need so many independents, you need so many national brands, and that's the successful formula. I think it does depend location by location. I think we have always as a business kind of recognized the value of independence, and I guess the character that they bring to a location. If you're able to bring in local businesses, then that gives the town centre or the location a unique characteristic that you cannot find somewhere else. So yeah, I think we've always recognised the value in bringing in an independence and mixing them with the kind of national brands. But I think now it's also got kind of within the retail centres, we're looking at kind of blending even kind of different uses within that. So whether that's workspace or residential space or flats and things or leisure space, and how do you kind of blend all those things together so that there's various different reasons for people to visit a town centre or even visit an office building. We've got within our pioneer schemes now we're from an office perspective, you've got every different product range from co-working right up to at least 10,000 square feet, say. But then on the ground floors, we're looking at different amenities. So coffee shops integrated into our reception spaces, yoga spaces, gyms, all different types of amenities. We're even looking at sleep pods in one of our buildings as well. So there's all sorts of. We're finding that this blend is very, very important because people don't like the idea of going to their office and then going to somewhere that they like to eat and going somewhere different. It's about blending those uses together.
And would you be quite comfortable to have small independents that people maybe haven't heard of, but they have got that novelty, that appeal next to big names, or do you tuck them away in their own sort of corner?
No, I think more than happy to mix them together. I think that's you've got to do that because your bigger names will ultimately drive a certain level of footfall, and you do want to then, especially if they are a new or an unknown brand, you would want to put them next door to a bigger brand so that they get the maximum exposure that they can.
Yeah. That was a question from Natalie Critchard about getting lost amongst the big fish. There's one underneath that from Ikram Rabbani. Is the retail space moving, or has it moved more to a theme-based retail experiences? Is this the way forward? Anybody sort of seeing those? I don't know exactly without. With just that short question, what that means, theme-based.
I can have a go at this one. I think Becky might have more experiences in this space, but I think yes, as someone that's stuck in a generation in between the ones that actually just want experiences and the ones that like to shop the traditional sense, I think this is the way it's going forward. If you look around, you have social media, which is all about people sharing their own experiences. So why not take that into the other parts of your life, including retail? I've heard about this shopping center in US where they spent $40,000 to buy a statue to just drive footfall. I don't know if that's the concept of an experience, but it seems to me ridiculous that you're spending almost 50,000 just to buy a statue for a shopping mall. So there's definitely a trend going that way. The way it's going to become, I think it might be unclear, but there are quite a few stars in this space that we're looking at as well.
Okay, Becky, any of the concepts that you've seen coming along echo that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not like you. I'm not entirely sure exactly what he means by the question. So I've got a range of answers that hopefully one of them meets it. If he's talking about if you're looking at placemaking in destinations, yes, I think they need to have a theme and they need to have a point of view, because I think what we're seeing is that there's almost like a gentrification by numbers style view of placemaking at the moment, where you put in what's particularly cool that year and you leave it there for 5-10 years, and shock, in 2 years it's not interesting anymore, or even in 6 months it's not interesting anymore, and they all look quite bland and quite similar. Because it worked once, it doesn't necessarily mean it works there. I think a lot of what James is saying about embedding it into the local community is important. So yes, from that perspective. If he's talking about something that's much more experiential, or that's much more kind of Instagrammable, I think really interestingly, we saw maybe 2 years ago it hit its peak. There was this kind of concept of this theatre store, the store that's a theatre, so the Museum of Ice Cream, the Museum of Pizza, all these different places that were effectively like Disney style stages that people would go in and just take photos absolutely everywhere. That kind of dropped off quite significantly last year as this rise of consumers wanting much more authenticity and having a much kind of, I guess, just becoming a bit smarter about how they were being exploited to promote that particular brand. So we've seen that die off. What is interesting is where there's a Instagrammable piece that really matters. So, for example, we've had brands that are really focused on sustainability show the process of their products being made in the store window. Or we had this amazing woman who's a spoon whittler, which is a thing. And so she was there and she opened the store in Notting Hill and she whittled these spoons and she let the wood shavings build up in the window as she was doing it as a piece of art, which I think was incredible from that perspective. If he's just talking about the general idea of experience, then yes, absolutely. It was already moving that way. And again, it's kind of accelerated. There was a really interesting piece yesterday that Norman Foster wrote. I can't remember what he wrote it in, but he said that each crisis has hastened and magnified the inevitable, which I think is really interesting when you look at how COVID has just really flip the pace of these changes that were already happening. That was an incredibly long-winded answer, and there are 3 different versions of it, so hopefully one worked.
That was good. I enjoyed it. I just wanted to change tack slightly in terms of another theme that we've heard a lot about is sort of the role of city centres, the role of neighbourhoods and suburban districts. And Caroline, are you seeing any sort of weight of money, of interest from the asset owner side or the retailer side of moving their targets of where they're interested from traditional big city centres out into the suburbs at all?
I think there's been talk of it over the summer, because they're finding that we're finding that places out of town are doing better than some of the city centre ones because people are at home more. I think it's possibly a little bit early to start seeing big money spent on the back of that, because there's still uncertainty about how much of the behavioural change that's happened over the last 6-7 months will stick, or whether we'll go back, or whether we'll go back halfway. So I think it's too, I think it's a bit soon to start seeing the big bucks being spent in the suburbs. Although as I live in the suburbs of Manchester, I would love it. So I'm all for it. But I think the city centres are still very much the focus of investment at the moment.
Yeah, and James, you're in both camps, aren't you?
Yeah, we are. Yeah, so I think that I guess in our town centres, we've definitely kind of the footfall and things hasn't fallen off anywhere near the same as or never fell off during COVID anywhere near the same as it did in the city centres. It feels like to me that in order for city centres to thrive, they need kind of thriving towns in and around them, and I think whereas city centres kind of fell off in the 1980s and then kind of came back, I guess now is the time for perhaps town centres to have that little bit of resurgence. And I think it was probably already something that was starting, but like with many things, the crisis has kind of accelerated that change. And I think it just plays into what do people want from their town centre, and what do people want from their city centre. And from a retail sense, to me, it feels as though within the city centres, the big kind of drivers, that's where you're going to see the kind of the flagship stores and the concept stores and the experiential things, and the real kind of brand set, the real flagship stores. Whereas in the local kind of town centres, it's going to be much more kind of convenience led, and that real mix of uses. So it's not just about different kind of shops, but it's about kind of can we look to blend kind of workspace into people's the town centres. And that's something that we're actively doing in both Altrincham and Stretford. And I think one of the kind of outtakes, if you like, from outputs, if you like, from people working from home, is that we've kind of found that it's great for a certain amount of time, but then you get to the point where you kind of miss an interaction, and productivity and kind of creativity it does fall off, and when you don't have the opportunity to meet people. So can we create something within our town centres that's convenient for people, that allows you to meet up, allows you to get a workspace together, and allows you to kind of bring through that kind of creative process that we've maybe been missing as you're doing everything over Zoom or over Google Hangout or whatever it might be.
Yeah. I see that Westfield are looking at putting turning a House of Fraser into half House of Fraser, half co-working space. Is that something that you're thinking about, putting co-working space in your shopping centres?
Yeah, it's definitely something that we are considering at the moment. We're trying to bring a kind of an office product, if you like, but we see it working really well in our town centres. That's kind of aimed at kind of grassroots businesses. So whether that's freelancers, really small businesses, perhaps people that have started up through lockdown. I haven't got the stat in front of me, but there is an amazing amount of new businesses that have started in this year as people have either been made redundant or have had so much time on their hands that they've finally thought, I'm going to get this business off the ground. So we think there's a real opportunity there to create something that is super flexible, affordable, and convenient, really, and is within a walk of your home, and you don't need to get on the public transport to go into the city centre. And I guess long term we see that we don't think that will go away. We think that we'll perhaps see a bit more of a blend of, I might do 2-3 days a week in the city centre, but then how nice would it be to do 1 or 2 days either at home or in an office that is located in my hometown or suburb.
Yeah. And Becky, are you seeing that in terms of the city versus the neighbourhoods sort of debate?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with James's point there. We've been looking quite a bit about what the future will be for work from home, and it does seem to be the opinion is you'll do a couple of days in your main office because you need that kind of connection, a couple of days in like a local version of that, just something to get you out of the house, and maybe 1 or so days at home. Obviously working from home is marvelous for some people, and again, if you're a young professional flat sharing with 5 other people or 3 other people and you're all on Zoom calls at the same time, it doesn't work. If you've got kids, it's more difficult. If you've got noisy animals, it doesn't really work. So there's difficulty there. What we're seeing kind of data wise on the retail side at the moment is that the neighborhoods are doing really well. So we've seen actually almost more demand than usual for places like Broadway Market or Brixton or Columbia Road, places like that. And obviously it's really fallen in the city centre at the moment. So there's definitely a shift. I don't think the shift will continue to be exactly as it is now, but I think it's likely to. I think it's likely that the neighbourhoods will continue to see strong demand. I don't think the city centres are dead. I think they're on a bit of a hold period.
Yeah. Talking of where the money is, Hugo, you showed that slide earlier about the rapid rise of tech investment money coming into property, and it was sort of echoing what happened in fintech a few years ago. Has that started to dry up, or is that still carrying on through the pandemic, that investors are still interested out there?
Yeah. So one of the things that's really particular to this crisis, especially if you compare it to the 2018, is that it feels like a temporary crisis. It feels like there wasn't really anything wrong with the world that led to this point, right? Whereas before you had very long-standing economic effects. What that means is there was a lot of capital in the market. There still is a lot of capital in the market. What happened was that a lot of the startups had to go back into kind of a let's control the situation mode, and investors then went into portfolio management mode, like the vast majority of industries, and trying to protect the companies that they've invested, trying to support the founders that they bet on previously. So I wouldn't say they necessarily dried up. New investments obviously decreased, but as with any crisis, the ones that survive after this will be in a great position. I do think that, echoing what a lot of people have said before, it's a great opportunity to launch a business. And I mean, one of the largest prop tech companies over the past decades, Airbnb, was launched out of a crisis. So we're hoping to see the same, and hopefully we will bet in one of those. But I think there is the capital to invest. There haven't been, obviously, there's been a drop in the number of investments because investors are also becoming a bit pickier throughout this time. But I do expect that to come back because the capital is there, which is different from what happened in 2018.
And for anybody watching that is maybe thinking of doing that, or they're from a startup, or they've got a new sub-brand they want to launch at the moment, what would be your advice to them coming to market?
Try to build something as small as possible. You don't need to raise huge amounts of capital to understand if something works. So I've oddly enough, we're starting to recruit for our next accelerator cohort, and I have seen a lot of startups that come to us asking for funding for a full-on project. And in that situation, you're at risk that you're building something that no one wants. So my main advice is you don't always need money to do everything. Especially for VC, you don't need a lot of money in the beginning to understand if you're right or wrong, or to have a sense if you're right or wrong. So my main advice would be try to get something out, test it. If it works, great, you're onto something. If it doesn't work, move on to the next one. And I think that's not just because of the pandemic. That should just be a principle.
Yeah, absolutely. And James, putting that from a developer's perspective, is there a real pressure on budgets for trying new things and innovating at the moment, or is there still space within your sort of project plan to do that and adopt new ways of working, perhaps?
No, I think obviously it's a very difficult time at the moment, and I suppose with the uncertainty that we've got over the next kind of 3, 6, 9, however many months, it can be sometimes difficult to kind of secure funding to try out new ideas. I think we've been really fortunate because through kind of the relationships that we hold with our customers, which are our tenants, we call our tenants customers. We've managed to secure good levels of collection of rent, so that's put us in a strong position going into the next 6 months. yeah, I think, we're developing up a number of new kind of strategies at the moment, one of which being the kind of grassroots workspace idea, where we've got the commitment there to fund that and to kind of do something with that. So I think we're absolutely still trying to innovate, and we're still doing new things. And I think it's like we said before, it's a really good opportunity to do that now. And I imagine a lot of companies will perhaps stand still, and I think we're seeing it as an opportunity to really move forward through this.
Yeah, if you stand still, you're going backwards at a time like this, as the cliche goes.
Yeah.
No, thanks everyone. That was really good. Really enjoyed that. Covered a lot of ground there, and plenty for people to take back to their own businesses and hopefully inform what they're doing. So great, valuable insight. Thank you for giving up your time and inputting today. We'll move back over to the networking area shortly. We'll keep that open for another half an hour, so there's more time to catch up with people and continue conversations from before, if you're able to stay behind. So it just remains for me to thank, as well as our panelists today, to thank our partners, Node, Bruntwood Works, Mills & Reeve, and Mallcomm. The next event that we have coming up from PlaceTech is next Tuesday, 27th of October at 3 p.m. UK time, which is all about the dynamic workplace and preparing for the return to the office. That's in association with Smart & Spaces. We've got Nuveen, Heinz, and Hewlett-Packard, HP on there as well. Should be a good one. Details on the website. But yeah, thank you everybody for coming today, and I'll see you in the other room shortly. Thanks everyone.